Hi, this is Lily Vogelsang, the product manager of professional products here at Toon, and we're starting up a new video tutorial series here, which is our tip of the week series. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight some of the issues that come up on the forums or issues that are emailed into support, and I'll give some little tips and tricks on how to resolve those issues and why we do things the way that we do. So this first tutorial that I'm going to talk about here is about pivot points, and I had talked about this a little bit with some people on the forums just before the holidays, and so I wanted to reiterate some of the things that I had said and use a better example here to show off why we do pivot points the way that we do. So I've just downloaded some sample material here from the Karate Rabbit that is available off of our website for download so that you can create your own rig using this sample material to help you to learn in the learning process. And so it's pretty much unrigged right now. We've just got all these drawing layers that are laid out here. All the artwork is done, but there's no pivot point set up and there's no hierarchy set up. And so one of the things that I want to point out here is that there's multiple ways of doing pivots, and there's multiple layers of pivots, meaning there is the ability to use your pivot tool here to set a pivot point, and when you set that pivot point, it sets it on the drawing layer. So for example, if you go into your drawing view and you isolate that drawing layer on its own, here I'm looking at the upper arm, then you'll see where that pivot belongs on that drawing layer. And now the reason that this is particularly useful is that sometimes you have a case like, let's take the hand here, where I've got several different hands, and right now they're all using the same pivot point because they're all overlapping, but as soon as I want to swap to a different view, so if I look at my camera view, here I am changing from the front to the side, or the 3/4 view here, and you'll notice that the position of the hand changes. And if we set up the pivot point in the right spot here, then when you swap out that drawing, it's going to put the hand in the right spot. So that's the reason for this drawing level pivot. So basically the only reason or the only time that it's necessary to use a pivot on the drawing layer itself is when you want to have multiple views on the same timeline. Now sometimes what people do as an alternative is they will just separate the different views onto their own sort of hierarchies. So for example, they'll create one character template for the front, and they'll have a completely separate character template for the side. And if you do it that way, then you don't need to use drawing level pivots. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So I'll just take this example here where I've got my hand and I've got my arm and my forearm, and they haven't sort of fixed all of the joints on this one, but that's okay because that's not really the purpose of what I'm talking about today. But let's just do the easiest type of hierarchy. I'll drag and drop my forearm onto my arm, and then I'll drag and drop my hand onto my forearm. And I'm using Animate Pro here, but I'm trying to follow steps that you could do on Animate as well, as far as I can, so that those of you who are using Animate can follow this. And of course, naturally, you can always do this in Harmony as well. So now I've got a hierarchy for my hand, my forearm, and my arm. And we set up the pivot points on here just by taking our pivot tool and plopping that pivot point where we want it to be on that drawing layer. So what's nice about this is the ability to go back and just animate on your drawing right away. So if you're not doing any kind of squash and stretch, then this is nice because you've got a direct hierarchy. You can move the hand and the forearm together. You can move the upper arm, the lower arm, and the hand all together. But what happens if you want to squash and stretch just one part like this? You'll notice as I squash and stretch my forearm there, it's also squashing and stretching the hand. And that's because there's a direct parent-child relationship here. And so this is the reason that we sometimes get ourselves into a situation where we want to have the flexibility of being able to manipulate the forearm on its own, but we also want to be able to manipulate it and the hand together. And that's when we get ourselves into this peg situation. So I'm just going to undo the hierarchy that I did before. And I'll select those 3 drawing layers. and I can click on the Add Peg button to add pegs for those drawing layers. Now, they're all now outside of a hierarchy, but what I can do, and this is kind of an important thing here, is you can take the peg of the hand and you can attach it to the peg of the forearm. Not to the drawing of the forearm, but to the peg of the forearm. And so now what this does is, and I'll do the same thing on the arm there. I'll take the forearm peg and I'll drag and drop the forearm peg onto the arm peg. So now what I have is I have the ability to select the peg layers, and you'll notice when I select the peg layer it selects everything underneath it, like so. But I can select the drawing layers, and the drawing layers can be manipulated independently. So if I want to just now squash and stretch that forearm, I can squash and stretch the forearm on its own. Now there's a couple of things to be aware of. Of course, you'll notice as I did that, now my hand sort of pops out of where it belongs in Z depth. And if you're using Animate Pro or Harmony, then you can use your network here to modify the Z depth of those different elements by changing their compositing order in your composite. So if I look at the hand, the arm, and the forearm, right now it looks like the hand is actually behind the forearm because, you know, they look that way over there. But if I look in my pipes over here, I can just plop that backwards in the pipe order, and now it looks fine in this view. But if you're not working in Animate Pro and you run into this situation where this is like this, then you can select that drawing layer and turn off your Animate button because you don't want to create a keyframe, and then you can actually just nudge it using, make sure that the focus, by the way, this red outline is around your camera view so that you can nudge properly. And sometimes I just hit the space bar and then click to get the focus in this view. You can also turn on a property called Focus on Mouse Enter, which will make it follow, the focus follow wherever your mouse head is. But I prefer not to work that way, so I like to just hit the space bar and then click to get it over here. And then I can nudge by using my Alt and up arrow to nudge backwards and Alt and down arrow to nudge forwards. So you'd have to rearrange those layers there, but for the moment I'll just do it this way since that's the easiest thing.